everyone, to the Lucky Shots podcast. Week 5 for the NFL season. Game Day show here today. Just recorded with Dylan Corbett. Both those shows are going to be up today as well. So don't forget to check out the Lucky Bets podcast going into this Thursday night matchup. But let's hop into the Week 4 headlines. The NFL, man, it's crazy. Every week we're going to have something we didn't expect. And that was definitely the case this past week. We'll start off with Cincinnati and Miami. Cincinnati wins that game 27-15. Tua suffered a concussion very early. Don't know if it's linked to the week before. Don't know if it's a separate event, but he was brought down pretty hard. It was pretty gnarly. Curled up his fingers and everything. It was rough to watch. But for Cincinnati, they only gave up 1 sack and they didn't have any offensive turnovers. So are we starting to see the turn for the Bengals to start playing the way that they were last year? Only giving up 1 sack is a huge victory for them in not turning the ball over as well. It's a good recipe for success. Miami had to play with Teddy Bridgewater for the rest of the game, which definitely hindered their offensive production, but Cincinnati gets the job done. Very nice game for them. Then you had Seattle and Detroit. Who would have guessed that this game, there'd be nearly 100 points scored between the two teams? Seattle gets the victory 48-45. Seattle had 555 offensive yards. They didn't punt the ball, and they only had 1 turnover. It was a fumble. Geno Smith had 320 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. Rashad Penny had over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. DK Metcalf had 7 catches, 149 yards. But that wasn't the end of the statistics. If you look at the Lions side, Jared Goff had 378 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. And Jamal Williams had 108 yards with 2 touchdowns. It was just an offensive explosion. Neither defense decided to show up, it seemed like. And we got a treat between two teams that you wouldn't expect for there to be that much offensive production, that fun of a game to watch. But if you had anything fantasy-wise in that game as well, you definitely were winning your fantasy weeks. But good game there. Like both the teams, they're not going to be playoff contender teams. If they do get to the playoffs, they're probably not going to make it far. But they're two teams that are definitely fun to watch so far this year. How about the Giants upping their record to 3-1 against Chicago last week, winning 20-12. It's their best start since 2011 when they went 4-0. Who were the players on the Giants squad in 2011? How about Eli Manning, Ahmad Bradshaw, Brandon Jacobs, Hakeem Nicks, Victor Cruz, Mario Manningham, and fun fact, last time the Giants had this good of a start, they won the Super Bowl. So it's not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl, but it's a fun thing to look at that this is their best start since that year, and that's the year that they won the Super Bowl. But a big key part of their success has been Saquon Barkley this year. Last week he had 31 carries for 146 yards, 2 catches for 16 yards. Their defense had 6 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries. They were all over it. Chicago, we know they're not that great of a football team, but the Giants, they're getting the job done. They're a team that a couple years ago, I was like, they're one possession away from being a decent team. Well, now they've got their secret weapon back. Not really a secret, just their special weapon in Saquon Barkley, and it's definitely helping out as they advance to 3-1. Tennessee and Indianapolis. What do we think of these two teams? You never know what to think throughout so far this year. Tennessee gets the win 24-17. They improve to 2-2. And in this game, normally if you have the ball more, normally if you gain more yards, you're going to win the game. Was not the case. Tennessee had less time of possession. They had less yards. We saw this either week 3 or week 2 with the Bills. They dominated everything and still lost the game. So interesting to see that. But Speaking of Saquon Barkley being that weapon for the Giants, Tennessee's got their same weapon in Derrick Henry. He finally had himself a game. 22 carries, 114 yards, and a touchdown. Got involved through the air, 3 catches for 33 yards. And then if you look on the flip side, the running back position for the Colts, their main guy, Jonathan Taylor. He got a good amount of carries, but didn't get anything really out of it. 20 carries, 42 yards, left the game, won't be playing this week, so that's going to be tough. But the big problem when Jonathan Taylor was in is the Colts are still deciding to throw the ball 3 times and then kick a field goal inside the 10-yard line. Obviously, they're not going to have Jonathan Taylor this week. Hopefully, it is just this week, not a prolonged issue. But if you have that good of a running back, a guy who scored 20 touchdowns last year, why are you not going to let him run it in for the touchdown when you're inside the 10? Why do you decide to throw the ball every single time you're inside the 10-yard line? It just doesn't make sense. This week, they're obviously going to have to come up with something else because I don't think Nyheim Hines is necessarily that power back. And they're going up against the Broncos, who defensively are pretty solid. So, in Indy, man, it is hard to determine what they're going to do this season, as well as Tennessee. So, it was an interesting game to watch, but Tennessee gets the victory there. Philly and Jacksonville, this game was fairly close. It ended 29-21. Philly won. But Jacksonville, they were up 14 points after the first quarter. They jumped out to a lead. And then they gave up 29 straight points to Philly without scoring. And that was their downfall. They ended up scoring another touchdown late in the game, but it was tough. It looked a little bit like after that first quarter, the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, they all reverted back to last year. Lawrence had 1 interception. He fumbled the ball 4 times. If you turn the ball over 5 times, you're not going to win the football game. And had that not happened, we could be sitting here talking about Jacksonville upsetting Philly instead of Philly being undefeated still. But heck of a game for Philly. 242 yards out of Jalen Hurts and a touchdown. He also had an interception. But Miles Sanders, kind of the big part of that game. He had 134 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 catches for 22 yards. Philly, the last undefeated team, looking pretty good. They're looking legit. And, a lot of people might look at this Jacksonville win as, who cares? They just beat Jacksonville. But Jacksonville's not a bad team this year. So they're not beating slouches. And they're looking pretty dang good. And then how about the game between Green Bay and New England? It went to overtime. Green Bay wins 27-24. New England started with their second string quarterback and Brian Hoyer. He got hurt. So then they were playing with their rookie, Bailey Zappi. And they still forced this game to overtime. The Packers, I'm not saying that this game shows that, the Packers are not legit. It's just the Packers' way of doing things of, we're not going to do anything pretty. We're not going to blow teams out. We're just going to win the game. But you got to be a little concerned if you're getting taken to the brink by a team with their third string quarterback in. A rookie at that who has 0 experience in the NFL at this level. And you get taken to the limit like that. That's scary. But Green Bay, they had 443 total yards. They got 4 sacks. They forced a turnover. New England only had 271 total yards, but they forced 2 turnovers as well. And what really kept this game close was that Green Bay punted 5 times. 5 drives, they couldn't get anything going, and New England forced a punt. So, again, not pretty, but I just think that's the way that Green Bay plays, and you can't be too concerned about it, because if you look back to last year, none of their games were pretty. They just got the job done. That's just their MO. So, I wouldn't read too much into the fact that New England took them to overtime with a third string quarterback. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on, because normally teams who are playing a third string quarterback would kick the shit out of them. So we'll have to see. All right, let's look at the state of the league going into week 5. We've only got one undefeated team left. That is Philly. They're averaging 28 points a game. They have the number 2 total offense. They're number 6 in the pass, number 5 in the rush. They're also a top 5 defense. number 3 in total defense, number 7 against the pass, 9 against the rush, and I believe sitting at +8 turnover differential is one of the top in the league, if not the top. Like I said, they're legit. They are putting everything together, playing super well. And let's be honest. I mean, yeah, the Cowboys are sitting at 3-1. Yeah, the Giants are sitting at 3-1. Washington's sitting at 1-3, but that's still a super weak division, especially when you have Philly, who is clearly head and shoulders better than the rest of this group. I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with because they still have to play those divisional games, which I expect them to win pretty handedly. So uh, it's going to be tough to stop Philly this year. They're going to have momentum for most of the season. We'll have to see how it turns out. But if you look at their offense, Jalen Hurts, over 1,300 total yards, 8 touchdowns. Miles Sanders, through 4 games, is averaging almost 100 yards a game. That's different. And almost a touchdown a game. He's got 394 total or rushing yards, I believe, with 3 touchdowns, 4.6 yards a touch. He's doing really well, which you expect to get out of Miles Sanders, but he underperforms constantly, so you just don't expect him to actually do it. But he's doing it this year, putting it together. And how about A.J. Brown, 404 total yards for him, 16.2 average on a touch and a touchdown. He's definitely turning into a weapon for Jalen Hurts, which everybody expected. Like I said, they're going to be a tough team to stop. Defensively, you've got Hassan Reddick, who has 3.5 sacks, Bradbury and Darius Slay, who both have 2 interceptions. I think they're the team to beat in the NFC, and until they have a game that's like, ooh, this is kind of rough, I'm not really going to change my opinion on that. I think Philly, definitely best team in the NFC, could possibly be the best team in the NFL. Then on the AFC side, you've got Buffalo, who I think is pretty much the best of the AFC. They're 3-1, and their only loss was to Miami, but they still played well in that game. They outgained them. They had more time of possession. They beat them in every category. They just didn't put it together for a win. Kind of like Philly and Jacksonville this past week. They did everything right. They just didn't get the job done at the end. But they're number 3 in total offense, number 2 in the pass, number 12 rushing. They're the number 2 total defense, number 2 against the pass, number 3 against the rush. They're number 2 in points against. So they're an offense that scores a lot of points, and the fact that their defense can hold the opponents to the second lowest average in the league, it's going to be tough to beat them as well. They are only +2 in turnover differential, but anytime you're in the plus category for that, it's going to bode well for you. Josh Allen making his run for MVP so far this year, 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns, and Stephon Diggs is just being Stephon Diggs in this offense, 406 yards, 4 total touchdowns, 13.1 yards a touch, I believe. So if you've got a receiver who's averaging 100 yards and a touchdown every game, that's a weapon, and it's going to be hard to stop that team. Too early to predict Super Bowl right now, just 4 games in. Could be Philly and Buffalo. And I think that'd be a pretty fun matchup to watch. 2 teams that we don't normally see. You wouldn't have Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes in there. So that'd be fun to watch if that is how everything plays out. Looking at the rest of the league, you got 8 teams that are 3-1. Miami, Buffalo, Kansas City, Dallas, and the Giants. That NFC East. Talked about them a little earlier. And then Minnesota and Green Bay. Green Bay's 3-1 because their only loss is to Minnesota. That's going to be an interesting division to pay attention to as well with, the Lions. They're 1-3, but they're playing pretty decent, playing up to standard, just not getting the job done. Do I think all of these teams are playoff-ready teams? Most of them, but I think the only ones you could see fall out of contention are Dallas or the Giants. Like I said, I don't think one of them is going to hold throughout the rest of the season and give Philly kind of a run for their money, and I would expect it to be Dallas, but maybe the Giants just continue to roll. But I don't see both of those teams continuing on the way that they are. We'll just have to see how the rest of the season goes. And then on the flip side, you've got 9 teams that are below 500. New England, Pittsburgh, Indy, Houston, Vegas, Washington, Detroit, Carolina, and New Orleans. Um, and trying to look at those teams to say maybe this team turns it around and starts playing better. It's hard to look at any of those and say that. I mean, Detroit, I did say maybe they continue to keep pace with this division, but with Minnesota and Green Bay at the top of that, it's going to be hard for them to work themselves in. Washington, it's a weak division, so maybe they can work their way back into it. But the Raiders, I think, started 1-3. They did beat the Broncos this week, so it's not, the door's not completely closed, especially because Denver and the Chargers are both 2-2. So door's not completely closed, but Vegas is going to have a tough time getting there. Other than that, I mean, Indy, I think they're hopeless. Houston, hopeless. Carolina, hopeless. New Orleans, maybe, but they haven't performed to the level of a New Orleans Saints team yet. So, you know, it's kind of crazy where we're sitting right now, and we are only 4 games in. Normally, this would be the first quarter mark of the season. We do have 1 extra game, so we'll still say it's the quarter mark of the season. But it is interesting to see how things have played out so far this season. Now let's get to the Week 5 preview. Just kind of look at some games that I'm interested in that I think will be interesting matchups to watch this week. Let's start in London, going with the Giants and Green Bay. Both teams are 3-1. The Giants, talked about them a little earlier, their secret weapon, their best player, is back and healthy. If you look at the past few years, they struggled because Saquon either wasn't at full health, going kind of half speed. He's back in, he's full go, and they're 3-1. I mean, that's not a coincidence. He's obviously the best player on the field when his team is out there. So they're going up against Green Bay, who just had a sloppy win against New England. They had a rough week 1. That's 2 out of the first 4 games that have been like, is Green Bay like okay? Are they, where you're not so sure about them? And it's a sleepy game in London. I think the Giants are going to go in there. They're going to be prepared. They're going to be motivated because they know they're the underdog. They're sitting at 3-1, so they're confident in themselves. And maybe there's some thoughts creeping into Green Bay of, man, we barely pulled it out against New England, who was depleted at quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see. And, if the Giants can pull off the victory there, do we start talking about the Giants as like maybe an actually legit team? Or is it a game where we expect them to lose, Green Bay wins, and then we're like, yeah, Giants aren't actually that good. They're just have a decent record. Then we've got Detroit and New England, both teams sitting at 1-3, but is Detroit's offense actually like pretty good? Jared Goff is playing well. Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't play last week, but he's been a force. We finally saw TJ Hawkinson get involved. Both the running backs in that backfield, and Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. Swift won't be playing this week, I don't believe. But they're a team that looks like they've got some firepower. Their only problem is their defense isn't all that great. If you allow a lot of points, you got to score a lot of points to stay in it. But their offense has been doing that, so could be all right. And New England, regardless of who their quarterback is, I mean, Mac Jones is kind of practicing this week, but if you got Brian Hoyer who went out, you've got Bailey Zappi who kept you in the game. So are you really that worried going against Detroit, who's got a defense that you can move the ball on, regardless of who your quarterback is? It'll be an interesting game to see, and maybe we see another 48-45 effort because it is Detroit, and they just had that with Seattle last week. And if it does turn into a blowout or a shootout, who comes out on top? Is it Detroit not getting the job done again, or is it New England just falling a little short against a kind of bad defense? That one's going to be good to watch as well. Miami and the Jets. This game's interesting because there's no Tua, And Zach Wilson didn't do too bad last week, and Miami's defense is another defense that will let the offense move the football. Uh, the Jets, they're sitting at 2-2. Who would have thought that? So is Zach Wilson going to have a really good game and kind of be like announce himself against a bad Miami defense? And can Miami move the football with Teddy Bridgewater? Do we trust all of the weapons to be able to help out Bridgewater with no Tua in there? What does this offense really look like without Tua at quarterback? It's going to be an interesting question to answer, and we get to see what the Jets defense or Jets offense is made of going up in a favorable matchup. So that one I'm interested in seeing as well. And then we just talked about Detroit because they had a fun game last week. Let's talk about Seattle going up against New Orleans. Seattle sitting at 2-2, another team where you're like, didn't expect them to even be 500. I didn't expect them to win a game for a little while. Geno is playing really well. Last week, again, he had 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. New Orleans, is it going to be Jameis Winston? Is it going to be Andy Dalton? Or Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara going to be back? I believe Kamara for sure is playing this week. Don't quote me on it. But Michael Thomas, is he going to be back? What is their offense going to look like if it is just Andy Dalton? Because, again, Seattle's got a defense you can move on. So Seattle, we know what we can get out of them. And New Orleans, their defense isn't up to par where it used to be. So we can expect Seattle to move the ball. They've been doing it, and it's against a not very good defense. But what are we going to see out of New Orleans? Offensively, is Andy Dalton going to be able to get the job done? He kind of putted his way through last week against Minnesota, but I definitely think they've got a better chance if it's Jameis Winston, and he can better utilize the weapons that they have. But if it is Dalton, I think they still got a chance. I mean, they kind of held in that game against Minnesota, so it'll be an interesting one to watch. It's another one that I think we could see a lot of points scored. Then Philly and Arizona. I'm curious to why Arizona isn't that good. Philly's 4-0. Arizona, their only wins are against Vegas and Carolina, who are both 3-1. Can they actually make something happen? They're a team that you expect to be good. You expect Kyler Murray to have this offense rolling. You expect the defense to play pretty well. You don't know about J.J. Watt, honestly. I mean, he had the AFib problem this past week or two. But what does this entire defense look like? Because it's just I'm confused. They've beat 2 bad teams, and then they've looked really bad in the other 2 games, and it's not what we expected out of Arizona. And now they've got another tough test in Philly. Philly, they should win this game pretty handedly, but can Arizona get something going? I don't think so, but it'll be an interesting test, especially for Philly, because there is a threat of Arizona. Their offense can be pretty good. Their defense can also be pretty good. And if they put that together, how is Philly going to respond? Last 2 here, we've got Dallas and the Rams. Dallas is 3-1. They're 3-0 so far with Cooper Rush. I think Cooper Rush as a Cowboy starter is 4-0. And the Rams are sitting at 2-2. And Stafford in his last 2 weeks hasn't gotten a touchdown. He's turned the ball over twice. This defense doesn't hold like it should. So what do we expect out of the Rams? We expect the Rams to be pretty good because they are the defending Super Bowl champions. They are 2-2. But, I mean, Dallas is playing really well with their backup quarterback. Their defense is really good. So what is there to expect from the Rams? That's the big question going into the game. And going up against Dallas's defense, it's going to be a good test. And then let's look at Sunday Night Football to wrap up our preview. You got Cincinnati and Baltimore. Cincinnati I am not sure what I even wrote here, but Cincinnati normally, historically, plays pretty well against Baltimore. And Baltimore, they're off to a hot start, but they blew their lead against Buffalo to lose that game. They kind of let other teams into the game. So it'll be fun to watch because Cincinnati, they kind of got things rolling last week. And again, Joe Burrow, I believe, against Baltimore plays pretty dang good. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. You expect Baltimore to go out there and win the game, but you do have the Bengals that they're like, hey, we're starting to get our rhythm, we're starting to get going, and they have the confidence of we've played pretty well against Cincinnati overall, so we have a chance in this game. It'd be interesting to see what goes on. All right, let's get to the Week 5 picks just to end off the show. Went 10-6 last week, so we're starting to get back on track picking wise. But I'm now 2-2 in Thursday night football, so I'm kind of getting the hang of what's going to happen on Thursday nights. 3-1 on Sunday nights, and Monday night, do not listen to me, except for maybe this week, because it's kind of a lock game, but 1-4 on Monday night. That's pretty tough. So let's start off with the Thursday night game, Indy versus Denver. I'm very scared of choosing the Broncos, but with Indy not having Jonathan Taylor, not going to be able to run the ball to set anything up, going up against a Denver defense that's pretty dang good, I got to go defense. I'm expecting this to be just kind of a crapshoot of a game, but we'll see. That game's tonight. Hopefully you have Amazon Prime so you can see it. But if you miss it, you probably are okay because I don't expect a lot out of tonight's game, but I do expect Denver to win. Then we start off kicking it off pretty early on Sunday with the London game between the Giants and Green Bay. Let's go with the upset. I just talked about the Giants and Green Bay a little earlier. Let's get the upset going here. Green Bay coming off of that kind of messy game. New York, they've got something to prove. They've got momentum, and they've got the confidence that, hey, we're winning football games. We got this. Green Bay didn't look good last week. I think they have the extra motivation to go in and get the job done. So let's go with the Giants there. We're going to take Buffalo over Pittsburgh. Pretty self-explanatory. We're going to take the Chargers over the Browns. That one's going to be interesting too because I think both running backs for Cleveland are going to have pretty good games. So the question is can the Chargers offense keep rolling so that Cleveland is playing catch up the whole time? Then you got Chicago and Minnesota. Not too worried about this game. I'm going to take Minnesota. Chicago could be sleepy in that game, but it's going to be Minnesota in my opinion. Then we're going to take Detroit against New England, Seattle against New Orleans. We're going to go another upset here. The underdog is the Jets. They're like, let's see what the betting line on that was. But the Jets are the underdog, plus 150 underdog. Let's go with the Jets. I think that they kind of keep it going with Zach Wilson, and I think Miami struggles to move the ball with Teddy Bridgewater at the quarterback position. Let's take Tampa Bay over Atlanta. Their offense is starting to pick it up. They finally got going last week. Atlanta, they're not good, so it should be pretty easy there. Tennessee and Washington. This is a toss-up game. I have no clue. I'm going to take Tennessee because they've got Derrick Henry, who finally seems like he's getting going. So we're going to take Tennessee there. Jacksonville over Houston. Let's do San Francisco over the Panthers. Panthers not looking good. San Francisco coming off of a big primetime win. I don't think there's a letdown there, so we're going to go with San Francisco. We're going to take Dallas over the Rams. Until the Rams can start scoring offensive touchdowns, I'm going to stay off of them. And Dallas's defense is pretty dang good, so we're going to take Dallas there. We're going to take Philly over Arizona. They're just obviously the better team. I still think they're the best team in the NFL, so we're going to go with Philly. Then Sunday night, we're going to take Baltimore over Cincy. I'm 3-1 on Sunday night, so I'm feeling pretty good about that pick. It does worry me a little bit that Cincinnati plays pretty well against Baltimore, but we're going to go with Baltimore in that game. And then Monday night, let's get back on track. Kansas City against the Las Vegas Raiders. Kansas City should pretty easily win that game. Let's just hope for no surprises there. But that is it for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Do keep in mind that the Lucky Bet Show is also up, going to be up by the time this is up on YouTube. So tune into that as well before you get ready for Thursday night football tonight. The Broncos, the Colts. Not going to be a fun one, I don't think, but tune into those. Make sure to give the channel a follow. If you're going to watch on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're listening anywhere, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anything like that, give a follow there as well. But thanks for joining the show today, guys. I appreciate it, and we will see you next week.